one of the things that you brought up is the uncertainty with adaptability of these tissues. Like, we don't actually have a great working model. Tendinopathy, I mean, collagen renewal, that's a black hole, because it doesn't appear to happen after a certain age, or if it does, we don't have the tool sensitive enough to pick it up.
It seems to happen on the outer core,
right,
more than the inner core,
right? Yeah. So it's like, and
not a lot,
no. And that's been studied a lot. And are you aware of any similar studies on lumbar discs in regards to their adaptive capability?
There are, I can give you researchers, and I've read their stuff, and it's confusing. Researcher named J.C. Lotz, been publishing for 20 years, has like mouse tail models and stuff like that. They load up mouse tails, and so guess what? If you just compress a mouse tail for a month, it starts to break down. But if you compress it and relax and compress and relax, it's anabolic. It builds up, right? So load is good for the disc in a mouse if you work with mice. But that's just neutral. They never go into, I mean, the boogeyman has always been flexion. There's so many research groups that show in a cadaver model, if you repeatedly flex a disc, it will delaminate. But they do thousands and thousands of cycles. And the big issue, of course, is that it's dead tissue. And I would say, like, if you took a tendon out of a dead person and you pulled it thousands and thousands of times, it would crumble as well. But we would never say, don't run. That's
one of the arguments with the Jefferson Curl, it was like, in order to do the Jefferson Curl, is I'm creating adaptability. I'm giving myself a buffer. And if people aren't familiar with the Jefferson Curl, it's just imagine the opposite of the deadlift that you would typically coach. Essentially, it's just full
from the top down.
The top down, segment by segment. You flex one segment at a time from your neck to your lower back, as far as your tissues will allow, and you extend one segment at a time from L5 all the way up to your neck until you're in the standing position again. Rinse, repeat with progressive loads. Christopher Summers, one of the old USA gymnastics coaches, anecdotally told me that he would have people he would have his athletes progress over the course of a couple of years, Jefferson curls holding a barbell with body weight for sets of 10 and standing on a box. And these gymnasts they have a lot of range of motion. And so, their face is basically at their toes in a Jefferson curl position, holding a barbell with their body weight. And they're doing these things for multiple sets. Then the argument was, we're giving them that buffer. And these are gymnasts, mind you. Again, what's the cohort that you're talking about? Well, we're giving your tissues a buffer so that if you are subjected to a certain position, you will have been prepared for it. But what you're saying is we don't necessarily know. We're not doing longitudinal studies on the tissues to know what adaptations are occurring, really. No.
And it's actually, we just don't know how adaptable the disc is, right? And like, we don't even really know if the wear and tear hypothesis is supported. There's a number of researchers who have said, like, I believe in like using load to catalyze positive tissue adaptations. And I like to think that can happen with the disc too. But I mean, if I'm pretty honest in the literature, it's more like your disc is going to change just based on your genetics, right? There's really not much that you can do, right? And the tendon stuff kind of supports a little bit of that as well, And so, but interesting. This is, I've heard. I was talking to, oh my God, what's his name? Dave Tilley. He's a gymnastics coach.
Yep.
And I was asking him about this idea that, if you do Jefferson curls or something, people say that will cause the disc to elongate, like the fibers will be like more flexible and allow you to have mobility, right? That's sort of the idea. But if you do deadlifts, it'll stiffen up the fibers. But what's interesting, and this is like a property of all connective tissue, this might surprise you guys, and your readers or listeners can go check this out, is that we're getting to just an idea here. I know of no research that shows that you can actually lengthen connective tissue besides pregnancy. hold on here. This is why. When you strength train, we'll talk about tendons for a second. When you strength train, so the muscles are contracting, and what are they doing to the tendon? They're pulling on it, right? And so the tendon undergoes about 4.5 to 6% strain if you're pulling around 80 to 90% of your max. So the tendon stretches, and you hold it for a bit, and then it relaxes. It's a spring. And if you do that, every day or 3 times a week, as you pull on that tendon, meaning stretch it, it gets thicker a little bit, and it gets stiffer, meaning the material properties of the tendon change. So does that make sense? The tendon becomes stiffer.
Yep.
Now imagine you're doing a stretch, right? A passive, boring old stretch. What are you doing to the tendon?
Pulling on it.
You're pulling on it. What does the tendon undergo? Strain, like probably less than an isometric contraction, but it undergoes strain. Why would it lengthen now? Whereas before, when we pulled on it, it stiffened up. Do you know what I mean? So I'm sharing my doubt with all of your listeners here, because I found one paper that shows it get less stiff with stretching, but it actually wasn't stretching, it's dynamic stretching, not acute, not static stuff. There's surprisingly no literature showing how we can stretch tissue. So taking that tendon model to the disc, I don't see how we can lengthen, like make a disc more pliable. It seems like we can only make it stronger and stiffer, which would support what you said about that gymnastics coach doing those positions, right? It's not and it's not even the disc that resists flexion. It's all the other passive tissues. The disc, if you go to 100% flexion or 90%, the disc is only contributing 95% of the passive, doesn't matter, but the passive extensor moments are, it doesn't get loaded a lot. You got to go like way beyond like what the whole system can handle before you really start pulling on the disc. If you want the research here, it's Patricia Dolan, and this stuff is 25 years old. So I don't actually know that. I think you can just stiffen up a disc. I don't know how we would ever lengthen it. And I would support the idea of the Jefferson Curl, but I don't think it's a really good exercise to do anyway.
The connective tissue conversation is interesting, and now you don't know if it's a conversation of what's happening to the actual collagen or the matrix. Because when I dive into the tendon literature, to your point, there's a bomb. Bomb review in 2015. The nuclear stuff too, where it doesn't, collagen turnover essentially is minimal after age 17. But the author's last name BOHM did a review in 2015 of the bomb literature. Sebastian Baum, yep. And so
I thought you meant the bomb.
No, well that's part of the conversation. A tendon on average seems to stiffen with progressive loading. Stiffening is a mechanical property, but what also tends to change is the material property of the modulus. But I've seen a couple one-off studies, and they're after the bomb review came out, showing that eccentric loading caused a decrease in tendon stiffness. However, these are one-off studies of only eccentric loading. We don't know where they were necessarily starting from compared to the general population, and the windows of time are like 4 weeks. So in my mind, I'm thinking, is there kind of like an adaptation where if you are subjecting the connective tissue to constant stretch on strain, but in a stretch position, is there some material stretching that occurs initially, but then there's like kind of this upswing of stiffness that occurs if you were to continue with the loading program over time, something like that.
What was it, a Blazevich study?
I'll need to look. I'll shoot it to you. So there is a Kubo study.
He always shows stiffness increases. You're blowing my mind.
I'll send it to you, because Kubo, the Kubo studies that I'm thinking of are like 2001, 2004.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm not prepared for this is because I wasn't prepared to talk about this. It's okay. But I will send it. I'll send it to you. And tell you, because I was very comfortable with saying that very just kind of easily that tendon stiffness increases with increased loading. And then and I came across a couple studies that I wasn't as comfortable saying that. And I was
the only person I know who says that they don't doesn't increase stiffness is Jeffrey Verrill's work. out of Australia, and he cites a Blazevich paper. But when you talk to Anthony Blazevich about it, who's a sports science researcher out of Australia, he's like, no, it's the muscle stiffness that decreases. Like stretching will decrease muscle stiffness and sensory stiffness, but not tendon. That's what he says with the eccentric stuff. So that I would go back to I want to see that, Quinn, if you can send it to me. But I would just wonder if it wasn't muscle or somewhere like maybe there's something right around where muscle transitions into tendon, and that might be where we can get a stiffness change, like to decrease or something. The only way I know how to decrease tendon stiffness is bed rest and injury.
Yeah. Jared, say something
I think I know what you're talking about. It's a patellar tendinopathy rehab program. They showed a decrease in stiffness.
No, that was a heavy slow resistance. That's another one. These were healthy tendons. So that's another one.
So I don't know. So that's a weird one because you just load up a tendon when it's injured, and in the patella it gets less stiff. But that means once it gets healthier, at some point in time, it has to get stiffer.
But there was a Consgard article on the patellar tendon as well, using the same exact protocol, and they found an increase in stiffness. So it's just this. Yeah. It's like it also comes down to what measuring tools are you using, and Scott Morrison brought this point to me, is that all of these studies have such small sample sizes. Is it possible that we're so myopic in who we're looking at that we're missing any type of big pattern, because maybe we are taking 12 people that their tendons happen to decrease in stiffness when we look at this, and then we're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
But then the Baum article is just another configuration of studies with small sample sizes. So it's just because you have an average of small studies doesn't necessarily mean that's generalizable either.
I don't know.
But yeah,
sure. I got you guys off topic.
No,
and this is what I mean. You get into the weeds of biomechanics like this, and if you use stiffness as a surrogate or a guide to rehab, it's just silly.
It's tough.
That's why you should just say, what attributes in you do we want to develop? Power, speed, strength, endurance, whatever it happens to be. Okay, that's what we'll do. What do you want to do? What are you having trouble doing? Okay, that's what we're going to do. Why do we even care about tendon stiffness? Right?
Yeah. Well,
it's the same thing back to the spine. Why are we even worried about it then? We don't even know how it adapts to load, so we're freaking out about it. If it hurts, maybe don't do it. Okay. Like, you know what I mean? It ends up being that simple sometimes.
100%.
Like, fuck.